The Journey of Stanley the Raindrop by Angela Lee. Stanley was a raindrop living in a cloud. He loved his home. In the cloud he felt so lightweight and airy. He could bounce and play and hop around. Life was good and Stanley was happy. Stanley would laugh as he slid through the cloud, bumping into other raindrops that were also having fun. Laughter rung out across the sky as the raindrops in all the clouds played throughout the day. A soft, cushy cloud was a great place to live. Over time, the cloud grew dense and became crowded with water droplets. There was less room to bounce and play. Stanley didn't like the change to his home. He wanted it to go back the way it was. But the cloud just got more and more crowded as raindrops moved in. Stanley wasn't happy anymore. He didn't like that new raindrops crowded his space. One day, the cloud reached its capacity, and it started letting go of raindrops. One by one, they began falling down to the earth. Stanley saw what was happening, and at first he thought, "Good! Now the new raindrops have to leave, and my cloud will go back to the way it was before." The cloud shed its raindrops, sending them down, down, down to the earth below. Raindrops dutifully lined up, ready to fulfill their destiny by leaving the cloud. Stanley ran the other way. He did not wish to line up. He did not wish to leave the cloud that he loved. Stanley hid at the top of the cloud, far away from the raindrops where they lined up below. With everyone leaving, he was determined to stay. He just wanted to have room to play. It was cold at the top of the cloud. Stanley shivered. Stanley realized that part of him was afraid to jump to earth. He didn't like change. Stanley preferred to have things stay the same. By and by, Stanley heard his dad calling his name. Stanley did not want to go to his dad. He only wanted to stay in the cloud. Stanley stayed hidden at the top of the cloud, where the wind was strong and the air was cold. Because he was hiding, Stanley did not move. He thought, if I move, my dad might find me. What Stanley didn't know was that by staying still in the cold wind, his structure was changing. Soon Stanley realized he could not move. He couldn't slide, he couldn't bounce, he couldn't hop. Stanley glanced down, seeing that he was no longer a raindrop. Stanley was now a snowflake. He was so cold. When did that happen, he wondered. And what can snowflakes do for fun, he asked himself. We have fun, said the snowflake next to him. Hi, I am named Sandy. Our turn will come, but instead of jumping off the cloud, we will gracefully drift down to earth. But I don't want to go to earth, Stanley cried. It is our destiny, said Sandy. One cannot avoid their destiny, but one can choose how they approach their destiny. It will be a much better journey as a snowflake. You were smart to come up here. It was then that Stanley's dad made it to the top of the cloud. His face fell when he saw his son. "Stanley, what have you done?" asked his dad. "This is terrible. Our family was scheduled to leave together. Now you cannot go with us. You will have to journey to Earth alone as a snowflake." "Goodbye, son. I will always love you." Sighing, his dad turned around, giving Stanley one more sad look before he returned to the bottom of the cloud. Stanley was sad. He didn't mean to become a snowflake. It had been an accident. Now his whole family would fulfill their destiny as raindrops, and Stanley would be left behind. Stanley felt heartsick, abandoned, all alone. Stanley wanted to cry, but he was frozen and no tears came out. He was stuck here as a snowflake with very few raindrops around. How could it be that he lost his family? To Stanley, the cloud no longer seemed to be a happy place to live. It grew colder, and the last of the raindrops were turned into snowflakes, and the cloud grew denser, and it got colder, and colder, and colder. Now there were no more raindrops in the cloud, no more laughter, no more playing. Stanley shivered in the cold. He saw that he was growing bigger and getting heavier. He became so heavy, he began to leisurely drift down through the center of the cloud. He drifted downward, feeling a bit happier, for now he was able to move, though in a different way than before. The fall continued. Soon Stanley exited the bottom of the cloud. Surprised, he looked up to see Sandy drifting right behind him. True to her prediction, the journey was gentle, drifting, floating, wafting ever downward. This gentle way of movement was fun. Stanley smiled, pleased with himself. Drifting, flitting, floating downward in a soft and gentle way. Stanley could not contain his smile. Being a snowflake was fun. Stanley did not remember being sad about the change that happened to him at the top of the cloud. In fact, Stanley barely remembered the cloud at all. Stanley landed in a field. He was no longer drifting. He had a sense of solidness as he realized that he was now connected to the other snowflakes. They were no longer individuals. They were all part of a snowbank. He couldn't figure out where he ended and someone else began. He thought, "This is different. But I have been through several changes, and I have found something good in all of them. I wonder what good will come of this change." The sun came out. Stanley noticed that he could hear laughter as children slipped and glided through the snow. He was delighted, for though he couldn't move, he could enjoy their laughter. Stanley was happy. He felt a oneness with the other snowflakes, which he now thought of as his brothers and sisters, and he could enjoy the sound of children. Day after day, the sun shone down on the snowbank, and each day it gave way a little, until one day Stanley's portion of the snowbank slipped off the hill and melted into a slushy puddle. Stanley realized he had changed back to being a water drop. He was still bonded together with the others as one, and together as water they flowed down the hill, first in rivulets, then in a creek, and then into a river. Stanley felt free again, flowing in unison with the other raindrops. Some traveled faster, slipping by the slower water on the side of the riverbank. Stanley wanted to experience fast, so he slowly slipped over to the center of the river, where the water was flowing fastest. Stanley laughed and laughed as he was bounced, tossed, and jostled, while being swept along with the rippling current. The water flowed and flowed, ever onward. Eventually the river dumped into the sea. Now Stanley was himself a water drop, but he was also an aspect of the ocean. Millions of water droplets all bonded together. In unison they soared high into the sky before crashing down onto the sand. Stanley found that being part of the ocean was fun. So different than all of his other experiences. The sun shined down, warming the ocean. The water at the surface began to evaporate. Stanley was one of the first to go, getting lighter and lighter as he lifted into the sky, now in vapor form. He laughed as he rode the air currents upward. Another fun way to move. Stanley drifted up into a soft, fluffy cloud. He was happy. He had found a new home. Stanley heard a familiar voice nearby. It was his dad. His dad was so very happy to see him. Stanley's dad asked, "Son, it's been a long time. Tell me, where have you been? What have you learned?" "Oh, Dad, I have been all over the world, and I have learned so much. I learned that life can be fun, no matter what circumstances bring. All I needed to do was look for joy in my current circumstance. Once I looked, I always found it. I learned that my perspective can affect how I adapt to new circumstances. I learned that change happens and that I can adapt to it. I learned that I am me, but I am also part of a whole. Together in a river or in an ocean, we raindrops are bonded into one, yet we are each ourselves. There is power in being part of a whole, and there is freedom in being myself." "Stanley, you have learned much," his dad said. "Life is a journey. It is up to us to find the good in our everyday circumstance. I will tell you a secret. The journey is the whole point of being. We are all part of the cycle of life. We are to follow our path through many changes. When we resist, we feel pain. When we accept the flow of life, we find freedom." "Thanks, Dad. I now know that I can find good in all circumstances. I am happy to be a water drop in any stage of my life." Stanley bounced up into a nearby cloud. "Goodbye, Dad. I hope to see you in another form someday." Stanley's dad smiled. He waved goodbye, knowing that his son would be okay. The end.